Can you say anything about the ambiguity of this digital era we're living in right now? Because that's a fantastic part of it. But film is also disappearing. What's your opinion?
Well, there won't be film in 2 years, other than in revival cinemas, and universities will probably still have 35. Eastman Kodak has stopped making 35 millimeter film. And within 2 years, everything will be digital. Even Blu-ray and DVD are on their way out. People are going to be getting stuff by streaming it or from a satellite or iCloud.
Is that a loss?
What?
Is that a loss?
No, it's called progress. You know, people used to listen to recordings by Enrico Caruso, the great opera singer, and the recording technique was so bad that here's how a Caruso song started. You'd hear, needle scratch, you know, and then they got rid of that, you know, and they went to 33 1/3 LPs. And so you'd hear someone singing or playing and it would go, now you listen to a recording and it's clean and it's perfect. And it's what the artist recorded without the interference of the technical situation. So I welcome that. I don't think I don't miss 35 millimeter, not at all. Every time, I never had a perfect print of any of my films because of the imperfection of the process. When you develop a film, let's say at Technicolor in the Valley in Hollywood, the composition of the water from the valley changes all the time. As you know, you'll get different amoeba and different things in the water, which sometimes, and then the electricity to the printer varies, fluctuates. So you can get a print of a film that, 8 frames of it are bluish, the next 12 frames are green, and you keep going through and making this stuff over and over again to try and smooth it out, and it never is. For example, for The Exorcist, to get to about 4,000 prints, we must have thrown away 20,000 because they were so imperfect. And now we time a film on a high definition rank, frame by frame, and I can say, oh, this needs to be bluer, this needs to be greener, whatever. It's done instantly. And then it's final. Because even after you do get a print that you like, a 35, then it gets projected and it gets torn, scratched, whatever. So no, I don't miss the old technology. I don't miss 78 RPM records. I don't miss the original recordings, which used to be on wire. Caruso was recorded on wire recordings. And then came 78 RPM, all surface noise. And there are still purists around, probably like yourself, who say, oh, what a great loss. We can't hear the needle scratch anymore. We can only hear this dude's voice. And that's the way it should be. I think the new technology is great. The drawback is that a lot of films are made only for the technology. Only. Just to show what we can do. We can make whole cities explode or disappear, or have 1 million people die, or have a truck transform into a monster. And it's done because we can.
And there's no involvement with the public, with the audience.
No, but audiences seem to like this. They go to movies more today than they, look at how much money some of this stuff makes. It's unbelievable. Yes, sir.
I like the effects on Sorcerer. the explosions and the bridge sequence in Sorcerer are all done real.
That's all real. Yeah, there's no visuals in Sorcerer. No opticals.
I like that the real. You see, everything was done mechanical. And
Yeah.
I like those.
I wouldn't have done them mechanically if I could have done them digitally. We had to do them mechanically, and a lot of lives were put at risk. You know, and I'll tell you, there's no movie ever made that is worth a squirrel getting a twisted ankle. And I've done movies where people's lives were in danger. You know, when I was much younger and dumber than I am now. But there are better and safer ways to do it. And now we really consider safety first, you know, and that's as it should be. Because you can get these effects without putting people's lives in jeopardy. And the films I made, especially The French Connection, there were, other than the grace of God, people could have been killed.
Were there a lot of actors doing their stunts on their own?
A lot of actors do stunts on their own, that was the question. Because you can cable them. You know, Arnold Schwarzenegger in that Terminator movie could drive a motorcycle through a plate glass window because he was on cables. He was safely cabled. The plate glass was, of course, sugar cane, candy glass. But then they can erase the cables. So it's hurt stuntmen a lot. What was formerly done by stuntmen is now done by the actors in the movie themselves. And they're just as effective, you know. They're absolutely just as effective. I think it's the stories that sometimes suffer. But digital technology is not an enemy, it's a friend of the filmmaker. Yes, sir.
Hello, sorry. I come from Spain and I would like to make you a question, if you don't mind to go back to the past a little bit more. You cast in two of your movies, two Spanish actors, two of the best Spanish actors we ever had, Francisco Rabal and Fernando Rey. I would like to ask, why was that? It was because of the Buñuel connection, or it was just because you liked them?
The casting of Fernando Rey was a mistake. I had a casting director on The French Connection who was not really a casting director. He was a guy who wrote theater criticism for a counterculture newspaper called The Village Voice. You heard of that? And he knew every actor around. He discovered people like everyone from Whoopi Goldberg to William Peterson. He found me William Peterson and Willem Dafoe and a lot of people. And we used to talk in shorthand. I made him the casting director on The French Connection. He wasn't a casting director. As I say, he was a critic. And we used to talk in shorthand. I'd say, let's get that guy that was in Belle de Jour. You know that guy that was in Belle de Jour, a Louis Buñuel film, and he had this 4 o'clock shadow. He was a tough guy because the part was that of a Corsican, not a gent, a tough guy, and a dock worker. And so Bob Weiner was the casting director's name, and he said to me, oh, the guy you're looking for, yeah, his name is Fernando Rey, and I said, okay, well, let's hire him. I hadn't even met the guy, but he came back, he said, he's available. I said, well, let's hire him. So we hired Fernando Rey, and I go down to the airport, JFK Airport in New York, to pick him up, and I see this guy, and it's the wrong guy. He is not the guy from Belle de Jour. I had seen him. He was in other Buñuel films, but not in Belle de Jour. And I see him, and I panicked. And I'm driving him to his hotel, and he said, oh, by the way, he said, you know, I'm not French. You're supposed to play a French guy. He said, I'm Spanish. I speak a little French, but not much. But I can learn. You have very little French dialogue in the film. And then he said, I said, look, you have this little goatee and this mustache. You have to get rid of that, because this guy was a dock worker. Now, he's not a guy with a goatee and a mustache and beautiful hair. And he said, oh, I could never shave my goatee. I could never. I said, why? He said, you would not want to see my chin. My chin is, I'm full of sores and things all over my chin. I don't know, jeez. So I get him to his hotel, and I go to, there used to be phones in hotels. I go to the phone and I call Bob Weiner, the casting director, and I said, you idiot, you stupid fool, you cast the wrong guy. He said, what do you mean? I said, this is not the guy from Belle de Jour. He said, well, who is he? I said, he's a Spanish actor. He's worked with Buñuel, but he's not the guy. He said, what do you want me to do? I said, find out the guy and fire this guy. Fire Fernando Rey and get whoever the guy was in Belle de Jour. He said, you don't mean Pierre Clementi? I said, no, that was the thin guy with the fake teeth. That's not the guy, he's too young. So by the time I get back to our production office, yes, Bob Weiner has learned that we were not looking for Fernando Rey. And the guy we were looking for at that time was Francisco Rabal. And he was in Belle de Jour with Pierre Clementi. And it turned out that Paco Rabal was not available, did not speak one word of English, and wasn't available. So we went with Fernando Rey instead, and it was like a gift from the movie god. It wasn't brilliant casting on my part. I wanted to fire him. I thought he was the wrong actor. He's wonderful, and he became a very good friend, and he was a very fine and distinguished man, and I lucked into it. And then later, when I went to do Sorcerer, I cast Francisco Rabal. So that
The one you wanted.
yeah, the one I wanted originally for French Connection. He was much more the type of the real guy whose name was Jean Jahan, who was a Corsican. Anything else? Yes.
Tu veux que je lise la question de moi, tu veux que je lise?
Oui, je veux dire, en fait, il a réalisé un seul film, un seul documentaire avec Fritz Lang. Pourquoi un seul documentaire? Ouais.
Okay, so he's asking
Excuse me.
you, you've made a documentary with Fritz Lang.
Yes.
So how come, well, what was the idea and how did it occur?
Fritz Lang, the documentary I did, I had heard that Fritz Lang was alive. This was, I think, in 1976. I heard that he was still alive and living in Los Angeles. So I called the Directors Guild and I said, could you put me in touch with Fritz Lang? I'd love to meet him. Do you all know who Fritz Lang is? If you don't know who Fritz Lang is, get the hell out of here, okay? So I said, I'd love to meet Fritz Lang. So the Directors Guild in Los Angeles gave him my phone number and he called me. And he got on the phone, he said, yeah. And he said, who are you? And I said, oh, I'm just a young filmmaker. I called myself young. I'd love to meet you. He said, I don't want to meet you. He said, what do I need to meet you for? I've met plenty of people in my life. You don't think I've met a lot of people? I've met a ton of people. I said, okay, but I'm just an admirer of your films. He said, they're all shit. All my films are shit. They were all recut by producers and stupid people. And I said, okay. Well, it was nice talking to you. Hang up. 2 days later, he called me again. He said, so, some people tell me that you're okay. So you can come to my house. He told me where he lived on a street called Hidden Valley Road. And I went there, and he was, I think he was about 86 at the time, I'm not sure. And he wasn't moving too good. And he had this woman taking care of him. And we sat on the couch in his small living room where he had all around some of the props that he had designed for Metropolis. And they're all around me. And he was eating these little German sausages off a plate while we're talking. And I started to ask him about some of his films, and he said, that was terrible. I said, what about M? M is such a great movie. M's awful. It's sophomoric. Don't you know anything? And so, you know, for about a week or so, I'd go over to his house, and he would abuse me. And then finally I said to him, how would you feel if I brought a camera in here? And because I know how you feel about your films, but the rest of us think that you've made masterpieces that will live forever. I don't care about the rest of you. I don't care. And finally he agreed, and I brought in 2 cameras, and I put them over my shoulder. You never see me in this documentary. And one of the cameramen was Bill Fraker, who had photographed Bullet and Rosemary's Baby. And the other was Bill Butler, who shot Jaws and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And we set up 2 cameras over my shoulder to Fritz Lang. And we went every day to his house for an hour, for 5 days. And I shot about 5 hours of film. And in between my questions, he would be picking up this sausage and chewing on it. And while I'm asking him a question, he's eating a sausage, and then he digests it and answers my question. And there were long pauses when he spoke. I would ask him a question, he'd say, well, you see, and then he would come up with this incredible answer. And so, but there were all these pauses, and he had trouble breathing, so I cut it down to about 45 minutes or 47 minutes from 5 hours, so it seems to move. And I first ran it at the Turin Film Festival many years ago, and then the BBC wanted to distribute it, which they did internationally. It's played all over, on channels everywhere, Arte and public broadcasting, and some commercial channels, and it's attached to the new Criterion Blu-ray of his movie M. But then, like, a lot of people have posted it on YouTube, where you can see it for nothing. And I don't know who did this. I don't know who gets money for it. I don't. But you could see it for free. It's on YouTube. I think 20 people have posted it. But it was extraordinary because he thought all of his German films were no good. He only liked his American films. He felt his German films were compromised. And then he told me a wonderful or an extraordinarily terrifying story. And it's on this. Have any of you seen the interview I did with him?
I've seen it.
You have seen it? You haven't seen it? Parts? Get the hell out of here, would you? At one point he said he had made a series of films about Dr. Mabuse, who was an evil character that was based on Hitler. But he was fictional, and Lang had made these films during the rise of National Socialism, in Germany. And one day, 1932, the National Socialists come to power in Germany. Hitler is appointed chancellor, and Fritz Lang gets summoned by Dr. Goebbels, who was the Minister of Culture. And he tells this story, he said, I thought I was dead. I thought they had brought me here because I'd made films against Hitler. They know it, and they're going to kill me. And he went to the Reichsministry, and he describes walking down these endless corridors with nothing on the walls, and his footsteps echoing, and just a guard at the end of each corridor, and then another corridor, and another. And then he's shown in to the largest office he's ever seen, a gigantic office. And he's told to sit down. At the end of the office was a platform, not quite as big as this platform, but a platform on which sat Dr. Goebbels' desk. And he said he sat there for what seemed like a very long time waiting. And there was a bank building across the street, out the window, and a large clock in front of the bank building. And he said, I watched the seconds of my life ticking away. And then he said, finally, Dr. Goebbels came in. He entered from the back behind his desk, and he mounted the platform to his desk, where he sat above Lang as I'm sitting above you. And he said Goebbels was a very short man, and he had a gimp. He had a bad leg, and he limped fairly badly to get up to his desk. And then he leaned across the desk down to Lang, and he said, Herr Lang, the Führer and I believe that you are the greatest German filmmaker. And we believe that film is very important to our Third Reich and the message we want to convey to the German people and to the world. And we believe that film is an important way to do it, and we want you to be the head of the German film industry. And Lang said his heart froze, because he was totally against the policies of Hitler. And he said, a minister, he said, I have to tell you, I must confess to you that my mother is Jewish. And he said Goebbels leaned back in his chair for a while, and then he leaned forward again with a smile, and he said, Herr Lang, we decide who's Jewish. He said, thank you, Minister, thank you. He left. He was going to give his answer the next morning. He went back to his apartment in Berlin, where he had a magnificent apartment with all of his belongings. He had a servant. They packed everything he could take in trunks, put them on a train to France, and he left the country that night. Left his apartment, left his furniture, left everything, and took only what he could pack in trunks, and went to France and then the United States. So he had not good memories of Germany or his films. He said that Metropolis, and those of you who are knowledgeable about film, I think there's two of you here, right? Those of you who are knowledgeable about film know that Metropolis was extremely cut. He thought M was a sophomoric concept, and he liked these American films, some of which were interesting, but none of which were Metropolis. Metropolis is an amazing picture, don't you think?
It's a great classic.
If you don't think so. Yes, any other questions? Yes, sir.
Okay, a stupid question now. Sorcerer, finally he will get the release date next year on Blu-ray, but don't you think it's too late because some of the cast and crew members are sadly enough gone and they cannot spoke about the tournage, the making of? It will be just you who can make an audio commentary perhaps, or what do
I
you
don't
think?
believe in audio commentaries. The movie speaks for itself. You know, there's a lot of people on the crew who are still alive, like the stuntman, Bud Eakins, who was Steve McQueen's stuntman. And I think, is it Amadou is still alive, yes? Amadou, I love Amadou. I did another film with him, Rules of Engagement. And he lives in Morocco a lot, but he's still alive. Unfortunately, Bruno Kremer is dead, and Roy Scheider and Paco Rabanne has passed away. But I don't believe in a Q&A, and I don't even think we have behind-the-scenes footage. They weren't doing that in those days. I would just put out a very good-looking, good-sounding version of the film. What extras? These guys are dead. You pointed it out. Making of? I made this film in 1977. What year is this? What year is this? 2012. What time is it? No. How can I do a making of 40 years later, whatever it is, when they never shot behind the scenes then? There's no making of Lawrence of Arabia either. You know, there's no making of Gone with the Wind. There are a few things. There's tests, screen tests, but I never shot screen tests. You want to hear about Linda Blair's screen test for The Exorcist? Would you like to hear that? Yeah. Anyone who doesn't can leave now. We auditioned thousands of young girls, 11 years old, because the part called for a 12-year-old. And many directors turned it down because they didn't think we could find a 12-year-old girl who could do this stuff in that movie. And we started to look at 16-year-old girls who looked younger, because we could not find a young girl either that had the acting ability or could survive that experience without being damaged. And so I started to look at older girls, and I was not finding anyone I felt could do it, and I thought we couldn't make the film. And one day, I had an office at Warner Brothers, which was 666 Fifth Avenue in New York, really. And I'm in my office thinking, we can't make this film. And my secretary rang me and said, there's a woman here, she does not have an appointment. Her name is Eleanor Blair, and she's brought her 11-year-old daughter with her. Will you see her? And I thought, okay, why not? Turns out that she was with an agency that represented children, but they didn't send her. They sent us like 10 other young girls. They didn't send Linda. And Linda had never really acted, not even in school. Her hobby was training and riding horses, and she had won some blue ribbons. And she was a straight A student in a school in Connecticut. And the minute she came in the room, I saw the figure of the girl I was thinking about. She sat down with her mother. Very intimate, the three of us. And I said, hi, Linda. Hi. I said, do you know what The Exorcist is about? And she said, yeah. She said, I read the book. I said, you did? Yes. I said, what's it about? She said, well, it's about a little girl who gets possessed by a devil, and she does a whole bunch of bad things. I said, well, like what? What sort of bad things? She said, well, she hits her mother across the face, and she pushes a man out of her bedroom window, and she masturbates with a crucifix. And I said, do you know what that means? She said, what? I said, masturbate? Her mother was right there. She said, yes, it's like jerking off, isn't it? And I said, and her mother's smiling, and I said, have you ever done that? And she said, sure, haven't you? And I hired her. That was it. No audition. I knew that she could handle it, and it wasn't going to mess her up. And it didn't. She's now like 52 years old. She's done a lot of acting since. She's very active with PETA, you know, the Society Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. And she's a lovely woman now. And
I met her in Germany a few months ago.
you met her in Germany? What was she doing?
Speaking about her animal occupation.
Yes? She looks good. No?
Skinny,
Skinny?
because she's a vegetarian.
She is a vegetarian because of animals. You know. Wish I was skinny. Not going to get skinny in Belgium, I'll tell you that. Are there any other questions?
To Live and Die in LA was for me also one of your better movies.
Why don't you give them the mic?
To Live and Die in LA was for me also one of your better movies. Also the car sequence, spectacular.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, I like that film a lot too. That was fun to make, To Live and Die in LA. Some of them weren't that much fun, but you know, it beats working for a living. I mean, directing a movie is much better than, you know, like having a real job or something. Seriously, you don't all know that. Most directors are full of shit anyway, you know, and they make up a bunch of lies about the meaning of this and the meaning of that, you know, and you know, most of us just love to do that, and very little of it, certainly in America, is really creative. It's a business. In America, no one ever called it show art. It's called show business. And that's what we're in. We're in show business. And you try to get people to pay money to see these movies. You know, and a lot of the time, look, I'm sure that there are going to be people that are going to hate Killer Joe. They're going to fucking hate it. It's all right. Everyone has an opinion. You know, I think it's not bad. You know, I think it's okay. And I believed it. I don't do a film I don't believe in. No matter how controversial it may seem or whatever, if I feel it has something to say about the human creature and our violent extremes, then I'm interested in that. And that's what drew me to Killer Joe.
Being that this is a horror convention of sorts, can you talk about The Guardian?
What about it?
Just how I mean, what drew you to that story in general?
I thought it would be interesting to do a film set in modern times that was like a grim fairy tale back then. And it's not totally successful at all, The Guardian. And we never had a script that really worked. But I had to go, and that's why I've done so few films since. Unless I can get a script really the way I want it, I'm not going to do it.
Where did the compromise come in?
Where did the compromise come in? Everywhere. All films are compromise. You have a vision of a film. You may have a vision of a story that you're writing, and you start to write it or tell it, and it comes out differently. You know, for the constraints of time or your own talent. You know, all of the problems of the films of mine that didn't work for an audience are my mistakes. You know, the actors brought everything they could to it, so did the technicians, and if they don't work, it's my fault. But why, how? Sometimes you just don't know. I don't know. I look at the Titanic. Where did that go wrong? Because I don't like it. But the world loves it. That's fine. You know, I'm not saying it's bad, it's just not for me. I didn't believe it. I love the graphics. I thought they were amazing. I'll tell you a film I hated more than Titanic was Avatar. Oh my God. You know, he's an extremely talented filmmaker, but you know, that's the most popular film in the world. And I didn't like it, but that's just personal taste. It doesn't mean it's bad. I know people have seen it 20 times, you know, and like it. If any of you like it, no. But there's no accounting for taste. And I don't think The Guardian, a film I made, is very good, and it's my fault. Where did it go wrong? I wish I knew. If I knew, I wouldn't have made the mistake. Sometimes you don't know. When a film of mine is a success, it's a gift of the movie god. That's all. You know, I never thought The Exorcist would be as successful as it became. It's one of the most successful films ever. And when we finished it, we thought people would laugh it off the screen.
I hope it's not a stupid question, but you did also Cruising, now a cult movie with Pacino. There is also a special edition DVD out since 5 years with extras and deleted scenes, but I think that are not all the deleted scenes because...
No, we couldn't find all the deleted scenes. I don't know where they are. The studio, Warner Brothers, they would have put everything back if we could have found it. But it would, you know, they lose stuff in the vaults. The Godfather, the negative, was sitting in a vault somewhere. When they went to do this last Blu-ray, they discovered that the whole negative had faded. So they had to spend $1 million on a negative restoration of The Godfather. So yes, a lot of the film I shot for Cruising, about 40 minutes, can't be found. It might be in some editor's garage or something. A lot of stuff, you know, because the studios have no respect for the films they made. They threw out all the props, all the outtakes and stuff from The Wizard of Oz. You know, you can buy pairs of Judy Garland slippers from The Wizard of Oz at auctions. The studio threw out the 2 extra sleds they made for Citizen Kane. And they were sold at auction. Spielberg bought one. I think he paid $100,000 for one of the sleds that wasn't burned. But the studios get rid of everything. They have no respect for the legacy of cinema, of the work that they're in. But no, we looked for the outtakes of Cruising. If we ever find them, we'll do a version and put them in.
You talked briefly about Steve McQueen on Sorcerer. I heard that you wanted to cast him as the main role. And do you think now that Sorcerer would have been much of a success if Steve McQueen had starred in it?
I think it would have been a better picture with Steve McQueen. We wrote it for Steve McQueen. We wrote it with Steve in mind. I talked to him before Wally Green and I prepared the script. And he said, oh yeah, I'd love to do this. This is great. And then we sent him the finished script. He said, fantastic. Best script I've ever read. I said, you know, we're going to shoot it in Ecuador. He said, what? I said, we're going to shoot in Ecuador. He said, why? I said, because I've seen some of the most amazing locations I've ever seen in 2 villages, one called Pachamama, the other Cotopaxi, outside the capital. And I said, the most amazing, he said, look, I'm just in this new relationship with Ally McGraw, which we all knew. And they were either about to get married or just or had gotten married. He said, do me a favor. If you can't find a place to shoot it in the United States, write in a part for Allie. And so she can be with me and not just, like my wife or whatever. But, she's an actress. And I said, Steve, you just told me you thought it was the best script you've ever read. There are no women in it. How do I write a part for Allie? He said, all right. He said, make her the associate producer or something, so she can have a job on the film and be with me. And I was such an idiot. I was so arrogant. And I said, I don't believe in that associate producer credit. That's all bullshit, I'm not going to make her an associate producer. It's an insult to her. There's nothing for an associate producer to do. He said, you've got to do something or I can't go off and leave her. You'll be shooting this film forever. And I let him go. Because I didn't realize, which I do now, that one shot of Steve McQueen's face is worth the most beautiful landscape ever seen on film. I'd rather have Steve McQueen's face on film than the Taj Mahal, or the Sahara Desert, or any other of the most beautiful sights on earth, or Angkor Wat. That what I now realize is that an actor like Steve McQueen in a role like that, it would have been a classic.
But I heard also he was very difficult to work with. So
You heard that he was difficult to work with?
Yeah.
Who told you that?
So that
Can I have names? You heard that he was very difficult to work with. From who?
from a documentary.
From who?
From a documentary that was on bullets or
On Bullet? And who said it?
A lot of people.
Who? Name a half a person. I'm not even asking you to name one person.
His ex-wife, for example.
Oh, his ex-wife. Oh, well, she'd be the one to ask. She had nothing to do with Bullet.
No, but then there were still a couple before he knew Ali McGraw.
I'll tell you, I've worked with Barbra Streisand, and I've worked with many people who are considered difficult as actors. She's one of my dearest friends, and I did a video for her on the song Somewhere. Oh, about 15 years ago. She was one of the easiest people to work with because she knows what's best for her better than any director. This is a woman that was told when she started, you gotta fix your nose. You gotta get plastic surgery on your nose because you have a nice face, but you got an ugly nose. And she said, screw you. And then she knows about lighting and things to make herself look good. And a lot of times a director, simply to show that he's in authority, that he's the director, will ask her to do things that she knows are wrong for her. And she works to protect the integrity of her work. And so that makes her difficult to a lot of people. And that was true of McQueen. If you asked McQueen to do something that was wrong for the McQueen persona, he knew it. And he would say, no, I wouldn't do that. And he'd sometimes say, I don't need a line here. I can just do this with a look. And he could. So that's not difficult. That's protecting your legacy. Barbra Streisand told me when I did a video with her that she thought she never looked good except in front of her makeup mirror when she was putting on her own makeup. And I started to think about that, and I realized that a makeup mirror has a lot of bulbs around it, small bulbs that throw a warm glow on the human face, and then when you look at a face that's lit from the warm glow of soft lights, in the mirror it's sort of softened a bit more, and it looks very beautiful. So I had the cameraman make a box that we put around the lens that was like a makeup mirror. and it had the light bulb screwed into it all around it, the lens, and when she saw it, she loved the camera, she loved the effect, and we called it the Strylight. We called it a Strylight, and she continued to use it. Now, it didn't do anything. I still had to use stronger artificial light, but to her, it was a comfort zone. And that, I realized she needed a comfort zone. And it was up to me to provide it. Now, I could have said, she's difficult, and she never likes the way she looks, and I'm going to put big arc lights on her and wash her out. That's not how you work. I mean, she's one of the greatest talents America has ever produced. And so is Steve McQueen, in his own way.
I heard you're a difficult person on the set too, and he's difficult, so maybe that would collapse.
Who told you I was difficult?
Different stories.
Name a person.
Linda
this
Blair.
big.
Linda Blair.
No, well, look, Linda Blair was 12 years old when I worked with her.
I know, but
and I would say to her, Linda, in this scene, you've got to look at Ellen Burstyn and you've got to say, your mother sucks cocks in hell. And she said, oh, I can't say that. And I said, oh, yes, you can. She said, oh, no, I can't. And I used to say, if you don't say that, you're not going to get your milkshake after the shot. You know, and I treated the whole thing as a game with her. I made it all a game, and I made her comfortable, and you know, she and I love each other. I treated her like my own child, but it was a very difficult thing to do, and I had to ask things of her that you don't really want to ask of a child. So now name someone who said I was difficult. Aside from the directors of this festival.
Jason Miller said that you had a funny habit of bringing a fire gun along.
He said, Jason Miller said I have a habit of firing guns on the set.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. That was originally done by a great filmmaker named George Stevens. You guys know who George Stevens? If you don't, get that! Okay. George Stevens, I read in Life magazine when I was very young, was doing a film of The Diary of Anne Frank. And he was doing it on a set, not in an attic in Amsterdam, but on a set. And in order, you know how you shoot a film, one shot at a time, and an actor has to perform with camera people standing around and lights and stagehands picking their nose or eating their lunch, and you've got to make the reality of being trapped in that attic in Amsterdam with the Nazis outside. And George Stevens used to sit above the set and he would fire a shotgun to get the actors to react properly to when the sirens were supposed to be heard outside their windows. You know, the Nazi sirens. And he fired a gun and it got people rattled. And so I did that on The Exorcist. I mean, look, I'm making a close-up of a guy who's supposed to be looking at a demon. But what is he looking at? He's looking at 4 guys eating their lunch, 2 guys having a conversation. There's not a demon over there until I turn the camera around and put a demon there. So it's hard from a dead stop for an actor to generate a realistic performance. So I did use guns with blanks to get a reaction from an actor. There's a scene in The Exorcist where Jason Miller is sitting in his study in the Jesuit residence. He's listening to a tape recording of the little girl's voice before she was possessed, normal. And suddenly there's a close-up of him and you hear the phone ring and he turns like that, terrified. Now, if I just made the sound of a telephone, that wouldn't terrify him. I had to fire that gun when he least expected it, and he heard a shotgun go off, and he gave me that reaction I needed. That's called directorial technique, because I respect actors. One of the hardest jobs in the world is to be an actor in a movie, convincingly, where the whole process is fake. It's all fake. You got a camera over here, and a person's supposed to be reacting to something over there, and that something is not over there. It's something else. And what a director has to do more than anything else is provide an environment for the actor to give his or her best work. And that's what I did. A lot of my techniques like that were extreme, you know, but it got the right reaction. But we never had real bullets in the gun. There was a movie that did. It was the Twilight Zone movie, where they were shooting real bullets at the actors. The Twilight Zone did it, I know that. And there was a terrible accident on that film, and the downdraft of a helicopter fell on 2 actors and killed them. But they were shooting real bullets at the actors who were supposedly crossing a stream, escaping from, I didn't remember who was it, the Viet Cong, or something like that. And in order to get the actors really terrified, the director fired real bullets at the trees above their head and stuff. Yes?
Can you talk about what it was like,
kind of creating that that environment you're talking about, that claustrophobic and paranoid environment on the set of Bug, because I thought that was an incredible. I mean, I saw the States play in Chicago, and you guys were able to capture that on film, which I was like, I don't know how they're going to do this. It's a hotel room, and that's all it is.
Motel, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I made the situation real for the actors. I scared the hell out of Ashley Judd with all of her takes, because the movie is about how paranoia can pass from one person to another. You love somebody, and you start to buy into their belief system, even though they're crazy. So it was really Ashley who had to make the transition. But Michael Shannon, who was the actor, you know, I had to get him in the right mood to do what he did. Like when he's pulling out his own tooth, he was doing that. But he is an extraordinary actor that will go to any lengths to achieve reality on film.
I saw him in the premiere of Killer Joe in '92.
Yeah, he's just a great actor. Tracy Letts, the guy who wrote Killer Joe and Bug, he discovered Michael Shannon in a park in Chicago. He was a homeless guy. And Tracy used to walk through this park, and he'd see this guy sitting there like that. And one day he went over and talked to him. What's your name? And he introduced himself, and he said, hey, have you ever done any acting? You'd probably be a good actor. And he got him to try out for some theater companies, and Michael found himself. Wonderful young man. Any other question? Yes, ma'am.
Do you have other regrets besides McQueen?
Do I have any other regrets beside McQueen?
The casting as McQueen in your career.
You mean in terms of casting or
whatever? Casting.
Oh yes, I was married 5 times. And I regret the first 4. But it wasn't their fault. You know, it takes 2. I was like not ready to be married. And yes, I regret the 4 marriages I had. I don't regret the woman I've been married to now for 22 years. But I was sort of impossible to live with. I bet you none of you can understand why. He thinks I'm doing jokes up there.
I wonder, is there a chance that someday we will see the documentaries you made in the 60s? Because you begin in the in the cinema by the way of the documentary. And since you promote realistic view of the world, I wonder what these documentaries look like.
The first film I made is a documentary. It's available only on videotape. I made it for a television station for $6,000, and it launched my career. But more importantly, it saved a man's life. It was an African American man who was on death row for 9 years, and I learned to become a filmmaker to save his life. And the film accomplished that. He was going to the chair in 6 months. And I had never made a film. I was a live television director. Had never made a feature film. And I learned how to do it while making that film. And that's available. It's called The People versus Paul Crump, C-R-U-M-P. And I got a note from the governor of Illinois, who he sent it to before anyone saw it, who wrote me a letter back saying it was influential in his decision to pardon Paul Crump. So that's the only one worth seeing. I learned how to make films on the job. I was a live television director and I didn't know how to make film. Why are there so few women journalists here? In America, there are far more. There's none of that.
Maybe it's because it's a fantastic festival, so maybe they're not.
Because it's a fantastic film? The women.
It's not a mainstream festival.
It's not a mainstream. This isn't a mainstream festival? What the hell is it? What? I thought this was a mainstream festival.
Of course it is.
We're showing Titanic.
You're showing Titanic? Oh, devolved. Women don't like fantastic film?
It's a different percentage.
Yeah. Well, there are like 2 women journalists
I
here.
like Avatar.
They like Avatar?
No.
Anyone who likes Avatar, where's the door? Youssef? Straight back there. Titanic? No, I mean, many people love it. God, this is such a surreal environment, isn't it? And there's so much surrealism in the streets here. So I'm not surprised that Ensor and Delvaux and Magritte came from it. Those are probably the 3 most influential artists on my work. Magritte, Delvaux, and yes.
And James Ensor.
And James Ensor. Oh my God.
James.
I plan to make a film here in January.
Yeah?
A French producer called Pierre-Ange Pogat. And I'll be back here, hopefully, God willing, scouting locations in July, and then again in October, November, and then hopefully start shooting in January.
Which movie will
It's an original screenplay by a British writer who wrote a film called Harry Brown. I don't know if you ever, with Michael Caine. Yeah. Well, the fellow who wrote that wrote this script. It's an original screenplay. And I think, my co-producers are Belgian, and the whole crew will be Belgian, and a French producer, Mr. Pogat. And it'll be an international cast. Very few Americans, maybe 1. But I prefer independent cinema. I prefer to shoot, in interesting places around the world now, rather than a Hollywood set or something.